And I'll hand this over to Imran for our topic on agile funding and budgeting. So welcome, Imran, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sherry. And thank you everyone for giving me the opportunity to be here with you and share my experience in agile funding and budgeting space. I have been practicing agile since about 2008, and for the last 6 years I have been working as an enterprise agile consultant, mainly in retail and banking, and I was fortunate to work with the strategy consultants like BCG and McKinsey to implement full-scale enterprise agile operating model. And part of this operating model, agile funding and budgeting, is one of the key pillars. So I would like to share a very high level of the framework and the process with you, and some of the common pitfalls that we need to be aware of, and some of the quick start guidelines. So as a Scrum Master or Agile coach, you have the knowledge of high-level framework to facilitate and coach the enterprise, finance, PMO, portfolio teams around agile funding model, because it is them who will do the heavy lifting, and we as coach facilitate the process and help them to create and reflect on the learnings. So a couple of housekeeping rules before we get in. So feel free to use the group chat function to post your questions. I'll try to pause and go over the questions and try to answer them. And also there will be 3 breakout sessions. The first one will be right after this quick introduction among us, and then followed by 2 breakout sessions related to the agile budgeting and funding. And then at the end, there will be some time for Q&A, and then Sherry will take over to wrap up the session. So Sherry, we can maybe take 5 minutes and make quick group, create breakout rooms for introduction among ourselves in a small group.
Sounds great. I love that activity because we start out the gate getting to know each other. And so all of you will receive an invite to join a breakout room. However, before you say, wait, I'm leaving, I don't want to talk to other people, that's okay. If you prefer to stay in the main room, just don't accept the invite and you'll be able to stay in here. And then if you prefer to go to small groups, please accept the invite and you'll jump into a room. If you happen to get into a room where others didn't accept the invite, don't worry, I won't leave you there by yourself. I will move you to another group till we make sure that you are able to collaborate. So you'll get a signal in 4 minutes that you have 1 minute left in the breakout room. And then so that way you can finish up your conversations. And at any time you can leave the breakout room and join the main session. When your 1 minute time limit is up, it's going to suck you back in here, done or not. So we'll see you again in 5 minutes. So enjoy your introductions. And so welcome back, everybody, from your breakout rooms. I see that some more of you have added your locations, and I'll call out that we have another first-time country on the call. We haven't had anybody here from France before, so Isame might be how you say your name. I probably have the accent way wrong, but welcome. And then let's see, we've got Mexico represented, which is also a new country for our meetup. So welcome, thank you for joining us, Rod. And some more people have joined us from the UK. And a few more have joined from the United States. So thank you everyone for joining. And Imran is gonna jump into his topic on agile budgeting and funding. You are on mute.
Thank you, Sherry.
Okay.
So for today's discussion, I'd like to frame our topics in three large buckets. First one is that what is our current funding model looks like, and then what do we need to do to reframe our funding approach and why, and then what are some of the high-level approach and guidelines we as a coach can leverage to influence the business leaders and finance leaders to come together to create that product line funding model. So what is that good looks like? So once you're able to influence your team leaders and stakeholders and clients and bring them together, is that at the end of the day, you have a persistent teams around product lines where resources are going to be assigned for a long period of time, and it will prevent the resource reshuffling due to stop and go situation, and also create enough flexibility within your product portfolio or program where you can have the product owner or the product portfolio owner be able to relocate or readjust the funding based on how the market needs shifting. So this is a slide that depicts like when you implement a customer experience-based product model, and this is an example from a financial services organization in their mortgage. What does it look like? And you can see at a very high level, customer is a persona, and you have this discover my needs, decision my application, complete my purchase. These are your customer touch points. And you have the recommendation, application processing, and fund disbursement are teams. And you have this cross-functional skills from UI all the way to ops and support, and then shared services like PMO, enterprise architects, risk, legal, and compliance. So in order to make this business product organization model successful, we really need to have a mindset. We have to champion that mindset that bring that customer centricity in our everyday conversation. Is that the customer experience we want to do it? Is this how the customer experience should look like? Are we talking about projects or products? And at the end of the day, are we creating continuous improvement, leveraging agile principles, DevOps, and delivery? And how are we all connecting the strategy to the execution through PMO or any other functions? And how we are enabling the enterprise architects to become agile architects, where the enterprise agile architects are not doing all the architects up front. They're doing just needed. So For that piece, we really need to work with the finance manager to help, or the CIO team to help understand that a successful agile organization, they pay attention to the interdependencies, hidden processes, and shared responsibilities to fund teams with the direct leadership or support from the CIO and business domain leaders. In most cases, the CIO organization leads the charge for budgeting and funding discussion in collaboration with business and IT and finance. Reason is that the business side and the finance side, they always don't understand the hidden interdependencies that a product team has with enterprise systems. And also, by cutting budget across the line, how it impacts other enterprise system and creates the waste, and leaving the IT team or product team unable to respond to market change in a timely manner. For example, if you have when the enterprise leader decide between a big data marketing feed to their organization versus IT proposal to reduce the unit storage cost, the business will cut the IT proposal of unit storage cost proposal and then have the big data feed proposal. But at the end of the day, when you have the big data feed, now your storage demand go up and overall your storage cost is going up. So we need to be mindful about these hidden processes and interdependencies. So now let's look at how the current project-based funding limits the scaled agile product development or digital product development, right? So the funding models currently used by finance or IT, PMOs, they provide very limited insight into how an organization is actually spending its technology and our product budget. So each of the funding views outlined in this slide gives a very narrow and incomplete picture of the benefits of technology investment. And they come with a lot of limitations that do not allow full transparency for investment prioritization, allocation, and monitoring mechanisms. For example, if you look to your right hand, bottom right hand, that incomplete picture of enterprise technology spending, in general, nowadays, the business leaders' budget account for about 1/3 of enterprise technology spending, and that is growing at a very fast rate. And then the budget controlled by the CIO organization. Now, you see the three views we see here: portfolio management view, budget accounting, and financial accounting. It only often apply to IT budget. And this does not give you the full view of the whole enterprise-wide investment that often leads into siloed, uncoordinated, and duplication of investments. And it also complicates the integrations of technologies across enterprise, leveraging technology assets and also compliance piece of it. And also it creates a rigid prioritization process that hinders flexibility and speed, because most of these our current funding models use project-based allocation with an expectation that the scope and benefit are known from the outset. So you define project scope, you define your resource, software, hardware cost, and that's locked in. So when there is a change need, you need to have a change request order, and that makes for a team to reallocate the money between different categories very hard, and it creates that stop and go situation for the team. So this kind of mismatch means that there is going to be waste because you're not utilizing your resources. You're constantly changing the context, and it's leaving the product team and IT organization completely unable to respond to any fast change. So you often hear the chief digital officer is complaining about, oh, my product is not moving fast. I mean, how can you move the product development fast when you're recording change order for every $5 difference? I'm exaggerating here, but it is the type of mentality we have in most of the organizations. And then hidden technology and interdependencies. So when you are using or expanding the technology to drive business growth, and that creates the business needs, that creates the infrastructure needs and costs. So as the business-led product development grow, there's also increased need to integrate with other enterprise systems. And this adds to the complexity of the cost of underlying infrastructure, like how you're going to share the cost among different business units or different products. And how do you think about investing in new technology? And by overlooking these interdependencies leads to all sorts of unexpected budget impacts. And you feel like the finance team or the person is in charge of the money, and then the product owner are constantly shifting and juggling, trying to figure out how best I can manage my product development. So the product owner is spending more time managing finance than managing customer experience. And also it hinders the understanding of the cost driver. So when a product team submits a budget, the business leaders or the CFO organization, they don't completely understand the driver behind each of the cost component. I mean, they do understand like the license fees, the hardware costs, but the driver, like the impact of one decision over another decision, they don't really understand that well. So that's why when I was recommending that the CIO organization should lead the charge, because then if the CIO organization leading this funding and budgeting in partnership with business, they're in a much better position to explain the cost drivers behind each of the investment and empowering the executive team to allocate the investment in the right way. So the collaboration between CFO and CIO team is very important.
So Imran, we have a question. Isn't a traditional model more cost effective or cost optimum? So management likes to use that funding model.
Say that again.
Isn't the traditional model more cost effective? And that's why people like to use it.
No. And reason is because, as you can see here, that different teams use different lens. PMO uses portfolio management lens. FP&A team use budget accounting. They're always looking for CapEx, OpEx, and the accounting team is looking for financial accounting. So there is a silo here. You cannot get a full view of what's all going on across enterprise. The only way you can get a view is through product funding, which cuts all the hidden, which brings out all the hidden processes and interdependencies, and that allow the company to make the right decision. So it is just, okay, a lot of organizations started using this GAAP accounting method, and they kind of forced onto a waterfall project without deliberating the efficiency of the flow. But with the Agile and the lean concept, I see in the practice that there's always a lot of waste. And when I set up the plan view to categorize the cost and educate the team how to properly report their costs, and we did the comparison side by side, the traditional way of budgeting, it creates a lot of waste.
Right. So
not only from the money.
Oh, sorry. If I understand your model here, what you're saying is we have the traditional way is more complicated and more expensive because we're doing three things. We've got one group of people looking at budgeting from transform, grow, run. So the portfolio, managing a portfolio.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, a different group is looking at CapEx versus OpEx, and that's what they care about.
Mm-hmm.
So that's more work to separate those things. And then we have finance looking at ledger items. This goes in this line item, this goes consulting, hardware, cloud services. So they're looking more at line items. So because we're trying to do three different things all in there, that actually makes it more expensive and more complicated.
Right, right. And everybody is missing the main point, the business and the customer outcome.
Yeah, so we're funding things not for outcomes, we're funding them more worried about fitting them into our model, our funding model.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
So in the next slide, so it was a great question to move on to the next slide, this slide. So what I have seen work better, and I've seen that in my previous clients implement this much more at ease, and it really streamlined their budgeting process, and it brought the people together. And it has many benefits. So one of the things is that the product or Agile funding and budgeting, it all starts with customer experience. What are our top priorities? What are the objectives and key results? And then the product portfolio owners or the business domain leaders, they take the enterprise OKR and break it down to them, to their teams. And the conversation shifts differently because instead of telling, oh, last year I had 3 million and this year I should get 3.2 million, we're now saying that in order to achieve 2% increase in net promoter score, we need to spend this much money in these capabilities. And that conversation touches everybody within the enterprise. And that's when the conversation comes, okay, then what is that CapEx and OpEx looks like? And once you assign CapEx and OpEx based on your scope, that's all you need. And you have Jira, you have PlanView or Rally or version 1. You train the teams on how to use CapEx and OpEx to log your time against. Everything becomes automated for the accounting team. So here you can see, once the product level OKR is set up, then it moves to capabilities OKR. So for example, within the, if you recall the first experience that helped me decide that recommendation engine. So if recommendation engine is one of the capabilities, what is that objectives and results we're expecting? And we're assigning the objective and metrics to the product managers or the product leaders and asking them, you're responsible for this result and what do you need from us? So you can see the shift from individual leadership to collective leadership, which is very essential for Agile team. And this helps the leaders to shift their leadership style too. Because what does that mean, collective leadership, without any control? So the control between the enterprise and product portfolio is this metrics. And if you look at all the successful digital companies like Google or Facebook, you share the OKR and you deliver your OKR. So, and that kind of walks you through that you do that enterprise OKR exercise annually, and then you revisit that quarterly and bi-weekly. And through your tools and system, you can close the loop between enterprise OKR and team backlogs. So in this, the way the budget allocation works is most of the time, a third of the enterprise IT spending is funded by a business area budget. So think about all the functionalities that you need to build. And IT budget comes for infrastructure. So what all the infrastructure that they need to put in place, things like automation, AI, or CI/CD, cloud environment, those fall in the IT side. And then the maintenance and existing technologies, it also fall in IT budget. But there are some exceptions that I will discuss in the following slide.
Before you move to the next slide, we have one question about where does value stream fit in this? So if a team, so if we have an enterprise, but they have 4 different value streams, is there another level that just squeezes in here between somewhere?
Yeah, value stream is your product, essentially your product line. So if I go back to the first slide, that value stream is based on customer experience. And if you have the cash to order to cash concept, where you're engaging with the customer, discover my needs, decision my applications, and complete my purchase. And your product teams are recommendation team, application processing team, and fund disbursement. And these are in traditional, safe, or the way we understand value stream mapping is it starts from recommendation, application processing, and fund disbursement, because that completes the cycle of a mortgage.
Okay, so then in this case, we're actually in your model that you're showing here, it sounds like you're funding OKRs rather than whatever traditional, that really complicated traditional model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And those
And
OKRs
if you
pass down through so at the enterprise level, you're saying this OKR gets this bucket of money, this one gets that bucket of money, and then they just divide that out as they go along.
Mm-hmm. And within that recommendation and application processing and fund disbursement, one of the things that we do is benchmark of the capabilities and identify, okay, which capabilities are in green, that means it meets the market need or customer experience needs, and which are in yellow and red, and which are within that yellow and red, now let's prioritize. So in order to serve that OKR, we need to work on the yellow and red, so the OKR can be very streamlined and create that differentiation in the marketplace.
Awesome, thank you. And I know this is a really complicated topic, so if you all have other questions, let us know. We do have one question here that just popped in. What is the point on the slide on OKRs? How does it fit into your storyline? So I'm this slide here, and Maru, if you want to explain a little bit more, if you want to come on and just ask your question.
Well, I could, but I would just be repeating the text. I just don't understand what's the point of this slide. I mean, apart from a hierarchy cascade of OKRs, I mean, I don't see the point with regard to the agile budgeting / funding story.
Right. So this is kind of like your foundational piece that you need to have to activate your agile funding and budgeting initiative. And this gives you a hierarchical view on how to approach it. So without it, you'll not be able to have that product funding model discussion, in my experience, and I could be wrong.
My question, I guess, is I don't see anywhere on a slide where it says what's the point. I don't understand. Is this slide supposed to say let's fund OKRs or something? Because I read all the bullet points, but I don't get the point of the slide.
Right. So think about it's a free slide to the main slide, which is coming up.
Okay, and so it sounds like really what's happening here is you're saying stop funding
creating that,
start funding products. Yeah. And so it's okay, so fund products, not projects.
Right. Okay. And how does that work in a larger context?
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
How are we doing in terms of timing, Sherry?
Sorry.
You're on mute, Sherry.
Sorry about that. We're about 45 minutes in, so
okay.
How many slides you have? We may want to skip over the breakout room, just depending.
Yeah, let's just skip. Yeah, let's just skip over,
Okay.
and then we'll combine it with the last breakout session.
Okay.
So this is the slide where it's the main approach that I use based on that OKR model, layering this funding model. So now, one of the essentials in funding here is to, when you fund the product, you just don't fund the product for planning and building, but you also fund the product to run it. And we often miss that piece in our project budget. So when the project is over, the IT team struggle with the support, run, and evolve. So main point here, takeaway, is to really focus on all three areas and understand what the talents and gearing ratio. Gearing ratio is very important. For example, how many projects a Scrum Master should handle, or how many teams a Scrum Master should handle, how many teams an Agile coach should handle. Because if we don't get the gearing ratio right, it can throw the OpEx off the chart. For product development team, they're mostly capitalized, can be capitalized. But Scrum Master, Product Owner, Agile Coach, these are essentially expense. So we really need to manage the expense through the right gearing ratio that everybody agrees to across enterprise. Otherwise, if one team says, I'll give 4 teams to a Scrum Master, another team says 2, then it creates that complexities during the budgeting process. And also it should include the hardware and software piece of it. So you can see that Discover My Needs gets a larger share of funding than Complete My Purchase. As the first one is more critical, business identified, it was more critical for them to compete and differentiate in the marketplace. And by funding your business capabilities, now the finance and business partners can see how the investment are directly supporting critical business outcome, which is measured in OKR. Now, for a customer portal, that needs to be continuously running, and any downtime will have a negative reputation for the company. You want to make sure that your product team and ops team are funded for plan, build, and run, and also upgrade. So that's kind of essential. And traditionally, whenever I start the conversation with the finance team, it's hard for them to sell the idea of plan, build, run, because they never use the idea. And that's where you run into convincing them about including run. And that's when you need the support from leaders from the CIO office, if CIO himself not or herself, if not them. Because they really need to drive that conversation with the CFO and business. Because at the end of the day, they're responsible for managing the customer experience through the operations and from the security and everything. And this is a way, when you layer this slide over the previous slide, you get the complete picture of OKR and OKR-based product funding.
Mhm. And how often, one of the questions we have here is, how often do you adjust the budget? Is it quarterly, annually, monthly?
So it depends. So for one of my clients I've seen, they look at every quarterly. They set the budget yearly, and then they look at quarterly. And for my other clients I've seen, they look at yearly, quarterly, and monthly.
Okay, so they fund the product for the year. Quarterly, they check performance, and then monthly
Yeah.
is really saying, where are we? Are we over budget? Are we in budget? And so what strikes me about your presentation here is that I think from the Agile coach, Scrum Master, us on the ground perspective, it's a simple conversation of move from what the business wants to do to what the impact the business wants to have. But when you're having that conversation with finance, and you're having that conversation with the current people in your company who are driving the budget, determining the budget, and the way they run it, it's a much more complicated conversation. So what you're showing us is how to have the conversation with finance, because they don't, when you use words like outcomes, impacts, product, they don't care about that stuff. They don't care about plan building. What they care about is, I need to know where this line item is, because this is what I'm reporting. So you're showing us how to connect that conversation with finance to what we already know on the ground. And I agree, this is important, because too many of us are just saying, fund the product, fund teams, but we're not explaining to them how to do that and still make their world work.
Yeah. And in one of my clients, I was delivering this Agile review training to the entire CFO organization, and CFO and his directs also attended. And they started talking about how can we track the CapEx and OpEx, because they're like, we can't get our hands around tracking, because they're coming from all over, and we're constantly in meetings with the teams and the auditors. And I'm like, with the Agile, if you're managing everything through Jira or Rally, that's your single source of truth. And you pick up the data by sprints, and the developers and Scrum Masters, they're booking their time, and you can easily sort it out in one Excel spreadsheet, and you can pretty much close your book every day. And the person responsible for CapEx and OpEx, she literally couldn't believe. So I had to meet with her a couple of times, and once she grasped the whole concept and how simple it is for her to track across the enterprise, she almost got teary.
Yeah, it reduces the complexity a ton when we can just say, okay, these features are CapEx, these features are OpEx. We don't need to know minute by minute what you're doing. Just know that if you're working on these features, this is CapEx, these are OpEx.
Yeah.
And just spend your time doing the work, not reporting, so that the finance group can know where to put your time.
So this one is essentially for us to use as our cheat sheet. Because when you're moving from waterfall method and how do you explain the new process to your finance and IT partners or PMO? I find this is a great cheat sheet. I got it from Agile Alliance. They had a work stream to work on Agile budgeting and funding. So I would encourage the participants to go into Agile Alliance and dig out the documents, and it has all the guidelines that an accountant or CFO office need to start working towards Agile funding. So as you can see here, project stage, cost allocation, and release. So anything within the preliminary stage, like what we call sprint zero, they all kind of fall in the expense bucket. And once the sprint one kicks off, it pretty much everything is capital. It depends also on the organization, whether they want to capitalize the sprint review meeting or daily stand-up, but everything else can be capitalized. So it also gives the benefit to the finance organization to capitalize more with some evidence through Jira or DevOps pipeline, because everything is documented there.
Thank you. And then Marco has a question, if you want to go ahead and unmute Marco. Marco, do you have a question?
No, sorry about that. That was a mistype.
Oh, okay. Sorry, you had your hand raised, so I was just checking in.
My bad, but there was a question in the chat.
Yes, and the question that we have in the chat, there was one that said, basically, so if we did this funding by, I'll start with team. If we do funding by team, and we just say this team cost us $30,000 a sprint, and we know what feature the team is working on, they don't actually have to book their time then. They just know, well, that sprint cost $30,000 and we apply that to this feature, which applies to CapEx. So it actually reduces the time of the team trying to fill in. What we're doing today is booking time so they can go to someone's spreadsheet so they can do their accounting. And so here it's more the product owner saying, here's the feature we're working on. And so it makes it much simpler to actually keep time. And Marco said that we can reverse engineer your spin from the features backwards, which is that same concept. Yeah. So there is a question from Alina about does it depend on what the capital threshold is? And if you need explanation of her question, she can jump in with that.
It does, because capital and expense, they're already assigned to your team, and how you're using it, it's onto you. But once you cross the threshold, then there needs to be a conversation between your leader, you, and the finance, and justify it, right? But as Sherry mentioned about estimating sprints, how much money you have and what feature and what that capacity looks like, you should have a good idea about your runway. How far can you go with this money?
And then, so by capitalization threshold, just for those who, these capital threshold, there's a lot of financial terms going around here. That first slide with the OKRs, where we said I'm funding a product and this portion of it is CapEx and this portion of the money is OpEx. That's the threshold that the question is about.
Yeah.
I think if I can chime in here, the challenge that we had were when every sprint, the team would go to production. when finance got their hands on that breakdown, basically the request was to switch from the capital model to expense for those product teams, because the business would get benefit, I guess, every sprint, and it was a smaller portion of the product development, and they would get faster value, so they wouldn't be able to amortize over a 5-year period. But I know there's a lot of financial terms here, and I mean, continue discussions that we're currently having with the finance team within the organization. So I just wanted to see what other organizations are doing potentially in that space.
Anyone who has experience, you can chime in.
There's a comment in the chat also about some of the experience. From my experience, there's a mismatch between the populations. So finance people are concerned about stability and predictability. Company, I'm assuming, not the product. And product teams are concerned about growth and customer satisfaction, and I'm sure stability about self. So how can you ensure that those two departments are having the right conversations? And
and
go ahead. That's from Izame.
Hi, Izame. So this is a great question, and that's where when the conversation starts from, what do we need to achieve for the organization as a whole, then the silos go away. So the finance then talk about, okay, let's talk about how can I enable the product team to deliver the OKR versus, I look for this and you look for that, and we don't align. Because from the systemic perspective, we're part of the enterprise system, and we all need to work together and complement each other to achieve the customer and business goals. And that's why it is important to educate the stakeholders about OKR and OKR-based funding before we get into the details around CapEx, OpEx, and reporting.
Thank you.
So we're at the end. If we have time, we can have a quick breakout room, or we can move to discussion around what are some of the common pitfalls to avoid.
I'm actually getting the sense that what might be more helpful than breakout rooms is that we just have some open forum questions, because this is talking finance. There's so much complication in finance that the average person doesn't experience. So I'm thinking that just some questions out loud where we can all get the might be helpful.
Excellent. That's great feedback. Thank you, Sherry.
Anybody want to, do you want to do your pitfalls and then we can do questions?
Well, I think the question's already coming around that. So just a high level, that before we start the conversation, we really need to manage the relationship and follow a cross-functional approach. So find your champion or sponsor who can facilitate the conversation and bring in key stakeholders from other team and build a cross-functional team to drive the discussion, and select one small area to focus on, and then use this as your pilot, and then scale that pilot design to other teams. And this is a couple of things that there are a lot of words here. A couple of things that I want to highlight here. Look at your organization's risk tolerance to change. So bringing that change management side of Agile coaching to make sure that people are not scared or the change is metered appropriately.
Any comments or thoughts on this?
Just a comment from my side. It would actually help if we could see an example of how this way of accounting looks like on a kind of sheet. Just as in my understanding, it's just an additional view you can use to keep track of your expenses, of your budgeting, of your how you're doing financially in the project. If you want to take a product-oriented view, but other areas in the company will need to have their classical financial accounting breakdowns of the expenses. And those frameworks like Transform, Run, Grow, I've worked many years at a company called Gartner, and they use that framework a lot in our analysis and our consulting, etc. I mean, we use it a lot, but it's just to give another perspective on how we're doing with our budgeting. Maybe to shift the conversation when we have to make difficult choices about targeting our funding towards other products, stuff like that. But it's still necessary to have multiple perspectives on how we're doing with our funding for the purpose of tracking, but especially for the purpose of strategic planning. When you plan ahead 2, 3, 4 years down the map, what are you going to do with your product roadmap and your portfolio, etc. And so if we could have an example, it doesn't have to be today, but it would, for me, greatly help me with the understanding of how this helps in companies. What I see is no matter how fancy and nice and modern and cool the frameworks are, they don't help with the communication internally, especially with the financial departments, and because they just speak a different language. They want to have their numbers according to their own frameworks. I don't know if my comment makes any sense, but
no, I think you're very right, and I have run into these issues too. End of the day, the accounting rules, the GAAP accounting rules, have not changed, and it's the same project accounting rule that we apply to project management too. And Agile Alliance, their working paper support this. I think the conversation, it's reframing the conversation with finance that you're going to get same information, and how do you roll that information up into your own format, right? So one of my clients, they use Jira to collect all the data around sprint and release, and they have created their own template to transform those data to fit into their ledger and accounting reporting. And it depends, it varies from client to client. And it also depends on which industry you are in, which country you are in, because the accounting rules are different by country to country.
Imran, there's a question from Catherine in Norway, how often have you experienced successfully implementing this with clients?
So far I have done 5 full-scale transformation. And as consultant, I never get to spend more than a year with a client. So as soon as the transformation job is done, we move to another client. So I have got the opportunity to help clients to start this pilot and setting up all the artifacts and playbooks and making all the changes in their time tracking tool or project management tool to create that link between their accounting and projects.
So it sounds like it takes a lot of work to get them. There's a lot of moving pieces just to get them started and set up, and then they can go in a run basis from there. There's not a install this. There's a lot of how's this going to work at your company. There's a concept and then application.
Yeah. And in my experience, it takes about 3 months to design the finance product fund, OKR-based financing funding model, and then another couple of months to implement.
Awesome. Do you have more slides, or should we pull this down and invite people in for a conversation?
Yeah, and that's the end of my slides.
So why don't we stop, and then that way people can see one another. And anybody else, we've got some open time. We've probably got about 10 minutes that we can take questions. So if you have questions, happy to answer those. Other comments? I see there's one in the chat box. Marcelo says that he's undertaken this with 3 clients so far, and he's 1.5 years in with his current client, and it takes a lot of tilling the soil. So how quickly you can do this might vary.
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you for actually putting on this session, because even though I've had conversations with your business partner, Alex, about this, there are times where I'm saying this, I must be crazy. I must be the only one who sees this. But I'm glad that Imran came on, because a lot of the stuff that he's there is just firing off bells in my head that I must not be crazy.
I think it's very common that we all see a problem with the way things are funded, right? Why are you funding projects when we should be looking at products? The challenge is how do we have the conversation to help you understand and us understand how to move? I think we're really clear on it needs to move, but then there's so little ability to have the conversations, because let's face it, accounting is complicated, and it's complicated by state, it's complicated by country, and then, you know, there are people who go to college to be in accounting. Most Agile coaches don't go to college to be accountants. So there's a huge gap in our ability to have the conversation.
Isn't there one challenge, and I think it's something that the inflation in IT into more strategic product development efforts versus traditional plant and equipment, you know, product engineering, you know, which doesn't have these problems or doesn't have the same degree of these problems, isn't it that we're asking kind of traditional IT shared service type organizations to now start doing things that traditional line of business plant product organizations would be doing, and they just have a much more rigorous operational environment. They're not having to share services in the same way, or if they do, they're just cost center charge outs, and that's just how it is. I don't know what your feeling is about that. It's been a thing I've seen recurring for the last 8 to 10 years. And I think that's part of the change management problem.
Yeah, a lot of you're very right, and a lot of times I got caught into the middle of discussion between the legacy system and how do we fund the infrastructures when we are talking about one product line and multiple product lines sharing one legacy system, for example, mainframe. How do we fund the mainframe? So yeah, I mean, it really gets complicated. Um, I think that's where a lot of the coaching skill comes in, that creating that relational dialogue and understanding how much they each other rely on one particular system and how they want to share that load. Because if for finance organization, mainframe still plays a key role, and how do you keep that base to continue to feed?
But using that example, if you had a SCADA system in manufacturing, generally speaking, that's not being funded by the CIO's organization, right? That's being funded directly into, plant maintenance and operations and the MRO budgets. And I guess what I'm really asking is, as we are bending quote unquote technology into more products, is this where products really belong? Do they really do belong in the CIO's organization versus, the way you have plant operations, or service operations, like warehouse operations, et cetera?
Yeah, I think using product is kind of creates a confusion, right? Because for your purpose, plant operations and CIO and product, the way I see the definition of product here is any outcome that we're delivering to contribute to business and customer. So if you can have that flexibility to flex the definition of product to make sure it makes sense for your organization. Product, we just use product. I don't know when it got started, but for my organization that I'm currently supporting, their operations team. So what product? They're supporting all the products of the bank.
Exactly. So I think one of the challenges is if you looked at the chart of accounts and you tried to actually find the discounted depreciation rate, you wouldn't see it on those things that the CIO is calling product. And I think that's a huge gap that you would have in other aspects, even in a bank. Core banking would still defined in CapEx terms, right? And versus doing customer experience, new UXs. I mean, you could try to graph that on in some sort of way, but it's not the same as, ATM operations, ATM maintenance, core banking, linking to ATMs, et cetera.
Yeah. You're very right, and it kind of, we have to take it on context, like what is that context, and how do we apply these principles in that context? Because there's no one solution to all the problems, as you rightly said, Aaron. And who's the right person to lead the conversation? In my example, I brought it CIO, but if it is the plant operations executives, because there are a lot of those, they're the most impacted person from the traditional way of budgeting and cost cutting measure, then that person should lead the charter.
Yeah, and it's a great point, because when you are running plant and manufacturing, if demand changes, well, your operational spend changes. A lot of times, a lot of these technology product projects, they just keep going independent of what's going on behind the scenes. you wouldn't be doing that, right? They wouldn't be calibrated to top line and bottom line versus quote unquote legacy or more traditional product and operations CapEx driven functions. And I think that's a gap, right? It's a gap that makes it challenging on an accounting basis, because they kind of go into their own bucket independent of the rest of depreciating assets and investment.
Yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense. And I would add to it that we just have, as a coach, we need to create the awareness among these stakeholders that it's not you versus me in this system. We're all in it together. And what is that we're supporting? What is our common goal? And how we're going to tackle it?
Awesome. Well, thank you, Imran. This has been really, it's been great. It's been eye-opening. It's been mind-blowing and probably a bit confusing because the topic is so, it's extremely complicated, and it makes me, I think I have sat back today for the first time and said, oh yeah, it's really apparent that Imran has an MBA and I don't. And probably some of you others who really get this. Like these are the things that your traditional, I was a Scrum Master, now I'm an Agile coach, and now I'm an enterprise coach. And there's a question here of, wow, am I really equipped to be doing the work I'm doing? Because often we jump into this space and we're like, yep, we think, I know Agile, I'm going to go tackle finance. Well, but do you know finance? Because there's the gap right there. You have to understand not just Agile, because we'll push our way on doing things when we don't even understand your way. And this is bigger than just engineering and product. There's the rest of the company that still has a different way of accounting. So if you're not going to change the whole company, we've got other things to talk about. So I really appreciate you bringing this in. If nothing else, I think that it's introduced the complexity to a lot of us who may not have really understood that there was complexity or how complex this space really is. So I really appreciate that. And so just as a closing note to everyone, of course, you can find Imran on LinkedIn and hit him up for more of his expertise. And if you have not yet taken your ACSM or CSP Scrum Master and you'd like to get a little bit more insight into just running an Agile organization from a lot of different perspectives. And I will say that there is absolutely nothing about finance in either one of these courses. And now I'm starting to question, maybe I should go add something and get Imran to help me. But here's a discount code that you can use, and you can find our courses on tandemcoaching.academy. And we want to thank you for being here. I hope that you've enjoyed the session today, and we'll be having another session in actually it's going to be 3 weeks, because 2 weeks from now is a holiday in the US. So our next meetup is going to be on July 11th. And we're going to have Haris Christopoulos from Greece, and he is going to be presenting on a topic of the why of a retrospective. So it's the stories behind the retrospective. And the major part of this is, well, why do you choose the retrospective you're choosing? Are we just grabbing some retrospective and saying, well, we want to do things differently? Or is there a real reason for selecting the type of retrospective and the individual retrospective you're doing that session? So we hope you'll join us for that. Starts at the same time, and we'll see you. And this recording will be available in just a few weeks. We post them out on our website. We post them up every couple of weeks, so it should